We've always dreamed of looking into the future. This program offers a glimpse into tomorrow to see how today's science could revolutionize life in 2025. We'll travel through time to meet a typical family of the future and their super intelligent home computer. But just how soon will it be before computers get really up close and personal?
This is something they didn't used to be able to do. What I see happening with computers is that they open up new ways for us to reach one another.
Digital technologies will provoke the biggest lifestyle revolution in history.
They are going to be extremely realistic, and they are going to have the intelligence to have a conversation with you that's indistinguishable from a real person.
Our relationship with machines and each other will never be the same again.
Friendships will be just as likely to be with virtual characters as with actual.
Millennium began, the future of wearable computers looked shaky. There were big technical challenges, and investors weren't convinced. Functionality alone wasn't enough. They also had to be cool. No one understood this better than the man who marketed the first wearables, Alex Lightman.
One of the things holding wearables back today is the fact that you're going to put it on your face, and nobody wants to put something on their face that doesn't look good. I see that wearables are just at the tipping point between being a small, marginal economic activity to being something that is one of the biggest industries in the world. I think we're heading towards the brave new unwired world in which every person, every place, everything is wirelessly interconnected for almost no cost. 6 billion people online all the time.
Sam, I'm in the park. Who are you?
The scientist who started the touchy-feely computer revolution was Rosalind Picard. She realized computers would never become truly intelligent unless they could interpret our emotions.
One of the scientific findings that completely changed my thinking about emotions was the finding that emotions were actually important for rational decision making. You know, usually we think of emotion as impeding decision making. So that then has caused me to think about how computers and how they're impaired in decision making might actually benefit from us giving them some mechanisms like the function that emotion plays in our brain. And I think you're going to see this happening.
Picard stood at the foot of an unexplored mountain. In 2001, computers were fast, but not very intelligent. Fine for number crunching, lousy for mind reading. Her team had to come up with ways that let computers register the symptoms or the effect of our emotions. In the early days, frustration was detected by sensing the extra force people applied to a mouse when things went wrong. Boredom and poor concentration were betrayed by a pressure sensor that mapped the way a person shifted in their seat. Any kind of excitement or anxiety triggered an instinctive rise in skin conductivity. This device measured that and caused a light to glow whenever the wearer was under pressure. It provided a reliable new technique for monitoring driver stress.
Affective computing is really still in its infancy. It really only began about 5 years ago, I guess, so we're a 5-year-old. The field is able to, I think, move faster than other fields, such as, say, speech recognition that began in the 50s, but I don't think it will take us 50 years to get as far as speech has gotten. I think we'll make much faster progress. That's important now that you got that result.
Getting computers to recognize facial expressions let the genie out of the bottle. Picard started with an infrared camera that tracked eye and head movements. It was a milestone toward the development of systems we take for granted in 2025.
No.
In 2002, effective computing was still in kindergarten, but it was kindergarten that cemented the bond between computers and today's young adults. Early in the century, a Media Lab team created a virtual playmate called Sam. He looked nothing like a real kid, but told great stories and showed such interest in what real kids told him that they preferred telling stories to Sam. No one understood this better than the brain behind the first convincing stand-ins, Keith Waters.
What we're doing here is to build synthetic replicas of individuals in a very realistic way.
In 2001, Waters and his team went public with a system that created eerily realistic 3D faces from a still photograph. One of their first creations was Valerie.
No more boring text-only emails. With LifeFX FaceMail, you can really bring your email to life. Or if you already have FaceMail, simply click here to compose one.
Waters hoped Valerie would tempt people into a new face-to-face relationship with their computers and the web.
The human face has evolved over many millions of years to actually get us to a point where we can recognize and detect very subtle characteristics of facial expression. And this is a very powerful form of nonverbal communication. We have cells in our brains that are there to detect these subtle characteristics. And so if we can tap into those types of nonverbal communication, we can build a very powerful form of man-machine interface.
Hyper-accurate medical body mapping gave Waters a digital gene pool of skin tissue and facial structure. Once a photo of someone's face was matched to the gene pool, the system took minutes to create a photorealistic model animated for speech and facial expressions.
When you put a face there, all of a sudden our brains start tuning into all those characteristics, and we do respond. So yes, you can have a relationship with a machine. I mean, the whole thing of 2001 and HAL the computer, there is a very definite, clear interaction, and you'll see a much deeper level of interaction at a human scale than ever before.
There was no risk of that with Rachel. She was an empty shell that merely... In 2001, the electrical giant Philips opened a dedicated Ambatel lab at their research campus in Holland. With a living room, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen, it was about the cushiest lab in the world, and the perfect setting for scientists and psychologists to see how people reacted to life with intelligent machines.
We have the technology to bring ambient intelligence into the world. But a major problem that we face is the problem of natural interaction. So if we would like to have a situation where people communicate with their environment in a very similar way as they communicate with each other, that calls for a true multimodal interaction style, where you combine speech, vision, tactile movement, body language, emotion and expression.
When Arts was speaking, no one knew if people would be driven crazy by living in such a high-tech playpen. No one really knew if people wanted machines that did everything for them.
Projects we design are sort of hinting at a situation where you can negotiate a relationship to technology rather than absorb it fully into your life or simply reject it.
Tony Dunn designed furniture that showed the world is fizzing with invisible and perhaps harmful electromagnetic signals. Along with Fiona Raby, he created a table with a built-in GPS locator, but indoors it was always lost. Another table, inlaid with compasses, sensed the energy radiated by electronic gadgets. A special phone housing turned the strident ring of a cell phone into a glow. Dunn wanted people to question their relationship with technology, but other people were trying to change the focus of computer science, away from global interconnectivity and towards systems that would help people with local everyday needs. This was the big priority for Irene McCarr-McWilliam.
We have the technologies that can communicate across the planet, but we perhaps don't have the technologies yet that can easily arrange a babysitter for us, or help a student find a room, or help me find a lost cat, or sell my bicycle. So the big things are kind of being in place and have been the focus of attention, but it's the small everyday things that make up.
In the days before teleimmersion, people traveled far more than we do in 2025, but at a huge cost to the environment. The real problem was CO2 emissions from road traffic. Millions of gasoline-powered vehicles were choking the planet to death. The answer lay with the fuel that keeps the sun burning: hydrogen. 100% pollution-free. By the start of the 21st century, hydrogen was set to give the internal combustion engine a spotless finale.
We've been using internal combustion engines for over 100 years. And if you think about how far they've come during that time, it's really quite spectacular. However, really, I think we're kind of approaching the end of the box on that technology. And ultimately now we're trying to use the cleanest fuel. And with the hydrogen ICE, the constituents coming out of the tailpipe are very near to zero emission. In fact, it would take over 300 of these vehicles to equal the CO2 put out by one conventional gasoline-equipped internal combustion engine vehicle.
Until 2015, car manufacturers went head-to-head in an annual challenge to see who had the cleanest and fastest set of wheels. Fuel cells had become the holy grail of zero-pollution energy. Instead of burning the gas, they combine hydrogen and oxygen in an electrochemical process to produce electricity. The only byproduct is steam. Since they don't need heavy drive batteries, the performance is great.
You get a nice, steady, smooth acceleration. There's no changing of gears. It's a single-speed transmission, and it's a very smooth, very steady, very enjoyable acceleration experience.
By 2002, most big automakers had signed up with Ballard Power Systems, the company whose technology started the fuel cell revolution.
One of the beauties of the fuel cell, if you look at the size here as a power source, it's obviously much smaller than a typical internal combustion engine. Further beauty is it has no moving parts with obvious beneficial implications to things like maintenance. You don't have to do an oil change. You don't have to do a tune-up. I think if you look as far ahead as 25 years, you'll see this is probably the dominant power source in the transportation world, both for passenger cars as well as buses.
Ultimately, fuel cells will offer us the really only truly sustainable transportation path, no pollution, and without sacrificing any of the creature comforts that we've come to rely upon with our vehicles.
A quarter of a century ago, a leading pioneer in the field was Odd Semple.
Everywhere where you need a display, you can expect this technology to come. Light generation is very efficient and is done within the material. No glowing wires or gases or vacuum is needed. Just add this layer and have light.
Light-emitting diodes can only emit one color, but red, green, and blue ones can be combined to make color screens. In 2001, these were small and had poor resolution. Today, the smallest full-color screens are incredibly sharp and less than ½ inch across. The largest high-def polymer screens are over 30 feet wide. By 2020, polymer LEDs had become the dominant technology for visual display.
The brightness
come up with all different kinds of ways that we can enable people to interact in totally different fashion with the virtual world.
To see if the sneakers could control audio data, Paradiso adapted them so a dancer could control music with their movements. This not only gave dancers a new form of expression, but proved later versions of the technique could one day replicate physical movement in a virtual world, without the hassle of cameras and trailing wires. Paradiso's work focused on getting computers to track and understand precise physical movement, but he also saw the need for a reference that helped users relate physical movements to those experienced in the virtual world. That's where the Terminova came in. Its lasers gave a physical reference for the effect of hand movements on sounds from cyberspace.
But the laser beacons in the Terminova, it's a way of establishing a ground truth so that you know that when you go to that point, you're going to have a certain kind of an effect, you'll have a certain pitch perhaps, and then you can actually vary that by using the laser controllers in a different mode.
This research led to the seamless integration of virtual and real worlds that makes the best computer games of 2025 so addictive. But a generation back, game designers were frustrated by the technology they had to work with.
I think what characterizes our industry now is how limited the experiences are. Our experiences generally tend towards juvenile fantasies. That means, blowing stuff up, killing people, winning sports games, things like that. And I was talking to somebody who was complaining about the level of violence and the kind of conflicts they saw in video games. And my response to that was, well, it's much easier to simulate a gun battle than a marital squabble. I didn't know how to do that simulation. But as our technology improves, our ability to simulate more interesting things than these juvenile fantasies will also increase. The challenge is going to convert to a much more intellectual and creative one.
One of the earliest games to rise to that challenge put players in control of suburban life. The big idea behind The Sims was making players responsible for the well-being of their family. The consequence of bad decisions was just like real life. Among the first people to predict the massive appeal of games that reflect our lives rather than fantasies was Henry Jenkins.
If we look 25 years into the future, you can imagine games as very densely realized works of popular culture, works that people are going to be actively engaged with, works that we will be talking about the same way we talk about cinema today or we talk about great novels today.
The interactions of The Sims have all the depth and originality of a good book, but the idea that the game could create connections between real people fascinated its author.
What I really would like to see people do is start trading their creations more and more. So you can, in essence, build a story as you play the game that other people can then see on the web. To me, that's one of the most exciting parts, because it's really interesting to watch two people play a game, or one person play a game and then describe what they did later to somebody else.
One of the early games to encourage a big online community was Black and White, an inventive take on the eternal battle between good and evil. It combined state-of-the-art graphics, stark moral choices, and a bond of shared experience among its players.
Only a very small percentage of gameplay right now is single-player game with the computer. Increasingly, it's social. So in fact, they may inhabit a world with more social connections than it did before, not less. Multiplayer worlds where there are thousands of other players and form very strong friendships or social networks in that space. And in that sense, games play in the future may be no more antisocial than playing on a softball team.
More than 20 years ago, a team at the University of East Anglia in England began to explore how computer games could bring European history alive. They began with a virtual tour of medieval Norwich. This kind of work led to the systems we have today. In 2025, kids can visit any place or time in history. But the learning revolution started more than 2 decades ago, among the first kids to grow up with computers.
With the new technologies, kids can explore ideas that previously were only taught at the university level.
Mitchell Resnick was a visionary who invented high-tech building bricks that allowed children to program behavior into objects they made. He realized their instinctive ease with computers created a unique opportunity.
It's the first time ever that the dominant new medium of our times, in this case computational media, is something that children feel more confident with and more competent with than their parents and other adults. This didn't happen before. But with computers today, it's children that are leading the way. So it's a very different situation where we have much more to learn from children than ever before. And the hope is that today's children will grow up and be able to create things as they grow up that are unlike what the adults of today are able to do.
This meant all bets about scientific progress were off, because kids had the chance to stretch their mental capacities in new ways. It's proved a far better means of raising human intelligence than turning people into cyborgs.
To be honest, I'm much less interested in intelligent toys and much more interested in intelligent children. I don't want so much toys that think, but rather toys to help us think. So I think the best toys of the future will be toys that let kids, through their interactions, develop new ways of understanding the world and understanding the things around them.
Resnick's programmable bricks inspired many children to become computer scientists. No one knows where their computer skills and imaginations will take us over the next 25 years, but it's going to be a wild ride. Other things. Perhaps the most important is opening up new ways for people to express their creativity. Jaron Lanier was one of the first people to explore this. As far back as the 1990s, his performances combined music with images from cyberspace.
I view the computer as a meeting place for human imaginations, as a place where you can have shared dreams, where you can have conversations that are made of everything you can imagine rather than just words.
But Lanier never saw computers as anything more than a tool.
If we think of humans as sort of spiritual endpoints, if we're sort of the purpose of the whole show, then I think that computers become just sort of dumb gizmos that run wires between us, and that's where I want to be. My feeling is that we should never elevate the status of the computer beyond that of the toaster.
That's unfair. Toasters never changed anyone's life.
Find out the secrets behind the gadgets and gizmos that you love. See the building process and intricate designs that make it all possible. On Technophiles, next on the Science Channel.